segregation is hardening, Jim Crow is on the rise, lynching is becoming more widespread, and there begins to take place a new era of forgiveness between the white South and the white North, particularly among veterans and their descendants. The white South and the white North feel that they need each other. They need each other's votes for political purposes. They need each other's business to help solve the economic crises and so forth. They fight together side by side in the Spanish-American War. And in the historic profession, you're seeing a new wave of interpretation as well. Increasingly, scholars are seeing the causes of the Civil War as less having to do with slavery than having to do with issues of political disagreement or with the economy. You will also see a shift with historians who are starting to talk about plantation life and the old slave system with more sympathy. Now, at the same time, there are African-American historians like W.E.B. Du Bois, there are African-American leaders like Frederick Douglass, who is saying things like, don't forget slavery in this history. You do so at your peril. But they have a limited audience. And they have not only a limited audience among, say, these white Northerners, white Southerners who are forging this new political alliance, but people like Frederick Douglass have a limited audience also among some African Americans. A lot of people don't want to focus on the history of slavery as descendants of slaves. In Gettysburg, the local black community wanted to honor its veterans and the sons of veterans. It didn't want to focus on the history of kidnapping and that kind of grisly, gruesome, and painful past. People are looking for a proud past. So it's coming from both angles here. So at this time then, the meaning of the war, the scope of the battle is being changed. And it's meaning that it's changing in the sense that at Gettysburg, you could become a hero regardless of whatever side you fought on, as long as you fought bravely. So the beliefs are diminished in importance, but the fighting for those beliefs becomes, heightened. And in the early 20th century, you start to see this take effect in the kinds of monuments that are being put up at Gettysburg. In 1895, the Battlefield Park becomes a national military park, and a little after the turn of the century, Confederates are invited to put up statues and monuments as well. The Virginia State Monument goes up in 1917. Robert E. Lee, a stride traveler. It's a very huge, big and impressive monument. And then afterwards, North Carolina, and then we see a whole, Louisiana, Alabama, Tennessee, and so forth, until they're lined along what is now known as Confederate Avenue, and it's become a major tourist route. And many people would argue that this veneration, that they would say that this is a venerating of the Confederacy, and that this takes or comes to its logical conclusion in 1927, when the battlefield becomes the host to a huge demonstration of people wearing long white robes and white conical hats. And the KKK stages its demonstrations at least 3 times in the 1920s and early 1930s. So the Confederate edition of Gettysburg, to some degree, takes shape and becomes entrenched, even in the 1960s and 1970s, when scholars are beginning, thanks to the after effects of the Civil Rights Movement, scholars are beginning to bring in the history of slavery into the causation of the war. They're beginning to talk more about the plantation in new ways. Even as this is happening, the battlefield, the history of the battle, remains immune to these new trends. I don't know if any of you have read The Killer Angels, for instance, which is a masterful historical novel, but in many ways follows this trend in which the two major characters in some ways are a Confederate and a Union, Union and Confederate officer who have kind of an undying friendship. And to this day, as I said, Gettysburg remains a place which is very hospitable to Confederate history. There has been a recent monument built that acknowledges these two generals that had this long-standing friendship. And in the boutiques and along the main street, Confederate flags fly quite freely. And the little white house, remember that I mentioned, where Abraham Bryan and his wife Elizabeth Bryan lived, still stands at the corner of Pickett's Charge, largely kept for storage, although the park has put a little plaque outside of the house that describes the free black family that lived there. But when it gets to the point where it mentions that they left, as they put it, at the time of the battle, there's absolutely no mention of why, in fact, they didn't leave, really, but they fled for their lives under the threat of kidnapping and enslavement. How many African Americans visit Gettysburg now? Remember the numbers that came by, or the people that came by trainloads at the end of the 19th century. Now, park guides estimate that it's probably less than 1/2 of 1% who are African Americans visiting this national military park. So we get back to our original question here. When we hear such an outcry over Governor McDonnell's remarks and questions and pronouncements, we have to wonder, gee, where have you all been, in a sense? His history is to some degree alive and well, and we are, in fact, we support it. We condone it with our tax money. So the story, and I want to sort of bring this, open this up to some comments and questions and remarks from you all. This shifting history, I think, raises a lot of questions. And one of them is a question about why our public parks, why our National Military Park in this case, supports a history or delivers a history that's so different from the histories that we read from scholars or that we read about even in the New York Times as bestsellers. Why does the park maintain a very distinctively different history and hold on to it so tightly? And the second question is, when do you imagine it will be possible to recognize the importance of slavery to the history of the Confederacy on a national level? And finally, is there a way that we want to or can honor Confederate soldiers? Those who celebrate Confederate soldiers tell us that many of these men just simply had a job to do. My question, though, is can people be compartmentalized like that? Can you support the soldier and not the war? Support the soldier and not the leader? And this gets to the questions that we'll all be thinking about in another couple of years, which is, what is going to be our spin on the Civil War from the perspective of this historical society, from the perspective of the state of Maine? We're all going to be sort of honoring this event that took place so long ago. What will we include? Who will we edit in and put out? How will we shape our own spin on the past? So I throw these questions out to you and wonder if anybody has any comments or remarks. And we can have a brief conversation because I know it's hot. Yes, sir.
My problem with what you're saying is you have to look at why the war started, not where it progressed to. If they had advertised to, if they